Hello and welcome. And today I'm very pleased to be joined by Oliver Rolfe, who is author of the Addiction Blueprint, as demonstrated. So we're going to talk today about addiction, but not in the way that it is usually framed. And I think that makes it far more interesting conversation, to be honest. And what Oliver has created is a holistic guide that helps us understand addiction as I don't know, not as a personal failing, but as it's a whole person imbalance, which is shaped by stress, burnout, and modern day life pressures that we're all under. And I think the important things is that the good news is that that there is hope there and there is a road to recovery. The book is very comprehensive in what it covers, but today we're specifically going to explore high functioning addiction, burnout, and overworking, which are very much seen as hidden risks, alongside looking at Oliver's own journey towards the balance. So, welcome, Oliver.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the introduction.
What would be good to kick off is understanding what does high functioning addiction, what is it, and what does it look like?
Well, it's a good start. I think one thing I would say is the word addiction is something that I feel people are still quite fearful, and there's still a stigma around. And I think first and foremost, that's why I named the book with addiction in it. So this book, whilst it says the addiction blueprint, it's the awareness of self, it's the awareness, as you quite rightly said, of life, the stresses, the pressures, the anxieties, the worries. We're all going to go through different things in life, and we're all going to go through challenges. And really, the bottom line with addiction, it's mental health and mental well-being. And if you talk about, say, life stresses, whether it's work, family, relationships, grief, death, trauma, and trauma obviously can come through in a myriad of different ways. So when you're looking at trauma, that trauma, stress, anxiety are pretty much the main basis of addiction, where it comes from. And really the addiction itself, or whatever substance abuse or behaviour that someone partakes in, it is invariably to numb or hide the discomfort from the trauma that sits underneath. And I think that's the basis of what we're looking at here. It is not this word that people see drug addicts on the street and homeless and dirty and crime. It's not as simple as that. And I think the high functioning side of it really is one of those points in particular. So high functioning is invariably someone who from the outside would seem successful, and achieves whatever achievement may look like. They can look like they've got it together with a family, but sitting behind all of that is trauma, it's stress and anxiety. And as we see, so, I've been working in the city for 25 years in finance, coaching, guiding, helping a number of different individuals from mid to senior level. And, the worry, concern that people go through, one through a move, which is what we deal with, but the aspect of family, what it means to them, the money that they need, the stress that's on them on a constant basis. We were working on something very, very recently where there was an individual earning hundreds of thousands of dollars who was literally going week to week, or paycheck to paycheck, which was bi-weekly, just to survive. And that just seems absurd. But that is the life in a lot of these cities with families, etc., etc. And suddenly you're building on with all this stress. And this person looks highly successful, very, very diligent, and they work and they work and they work to a point where it becomes an obsession, because basically work equals money. So therefore we need lots of money. Let's continue going. And that's the high functioning side of it. What looks to be, let's say, stable, something could sit underneath that, which is quite damaging.
And I think the key word you've used there, looks, and it is about the appearance, and people feel they need to keep up whatever persona they have created throughout, and that's when I assume it becomes harder and harder to go and well, apart from recognizing it in yourself, is to go and seek help. And obviously that's one of the things that you speak a lot about, is the stigma that's involved in it, and the stigma that can stop you going to look for help.
Absolutely. I think, that I went through a personal situation. All of my books have been written from a life experience point of view. So for me, I went through invariably burnout, which one could say it was because of work, but actually it was because of life. So I've run my own company for 16, 17 years. I hadn't taken a break, worked throughout holidays, traveled, work, dinner, dined, drunk, late nights, early mornings, jet lags, illness, and all of these things kind of caught up with me. And then within that, we had a number of family situations going on. My wife lost a father. My kids went through, or are going through neurodiversity, which is a balance of life. COVID was in that period of time. And I just think that life, there's a lot to deal with. There are loads and loads of challenges that everyone's going to face, as we discussed with grief or the stress or family or kids or whatever it might be. And it can come in many, many different ways. Health in particular is another thing. So, for example, when I was between 6 and 16, I had just under 45 operations. Now, when you think about it, I always say it quite casually because that's what happened and that's what I lived through. But I'm always interested to see people's reactions, because people's reactions are far worse than my thoughts on it. And actually, because of that, therefore, you do have an underlying trauma because of it. That there has to be, and it's something that I talk about. I look at. In fact, I had one scenario where I almost, almost passed away on an operating table. Technically, it was my fault. I didn't like gas and air very much as a child, and the gas was so horrible. So I had two operations, I think, quite close together. And the second one, I was like, I'm not going to take this gas. I thought I'd be really smart. And they put the gas mask on and not something that was pointed at my chest. So I thought I'll take a big gulp of gas and then I won't taste it anymore. And my mum, because I was, I think, like 6 or 7, I think my mum was there. And I obviously passed out because I took the gas. And my mum was like, why is he turning blue? Obviously, I'd stopped breathing because I held my breath. So not the smartest thing I've ever done in my life, but they kicked my mum out the room and dare I say it, they brought me back. But all these things, the bottom line is that there's so many things in one's life that can cause this stress, anxiety, and even subconsciously, that if you don't dig to the bottom and dig to the root of it, unfortunately, it can keep on reoccurring.
And I think a lot of trauma, and that was a traumatic incident that you wouldn't necessarily recognize as a child. You recognize it as an adult, and that's where the trauma comes out. And one of the words that we use very often, and I think it is really important, is resilience. And it's finding that resilience. And presumably, when burnout happens, is when we don't have enough resilience to the situation. So we then go and look for alternative things to give us the support.
When it happened to me, the biggest thing I was saying, and stress and burnout often gets overlapped. Stress is something that happens on a short period of time that you can manage and you can get through. For me, with burnout, it was exhaustion. And it's not just I'm tired, it's I have no energy. I have nothing left. I remember I felt like I was running genuinely on fumes. I just, like, every day became like a chore, coming towards a point where I just needed a break. And it's difficult, you've got responsibilities and families, and I am someone who takes on maybe more responsibilities than I probably should do at times, which is also about balance. And it's things that you have to stop doing to look after your own well-being. And that's it comes back to the whole point of what I said the book was about. It's about awareness. It's about being aware of how you're feeling, how you are, and being able to recognize it in a way to go, hold on, something's not right. I need to do something about it.
And for your own journey, which I thought was quite interesting, is it's almost like you had a family intervention to, I think it was your brother and, your wife that said and took you for a walk and said, we need to sort this out. So clearly there was an awareness there, but maybe you couldn't have shaped that into words. And I suppose we do that usual thing of suppressing things, saying, yeah, I'm okay, really. I'm fine. And is that how it worked for you? You needed somebody to really point it out to you, to recognize what you probably knew yourself.
Well, yeah, I think there's two sides of it, or probably quite a few sides to it, to be fair. So I remember when I started to feel really bad, people were asking questions. It was like, "Are you all right?" The "Are you all right?" question came out quite a bit. I'd lost a bit of weight, and I must have been purely down to stress, I think. And one of my friends, we went out for lunch, goes, "You're right. You don't look yourself." And I think these continued a little bit, and I did this is the point where I was exhausted and I just didn't feel good at all. My emotions were down. My connection with my wife was completely off. We just weren't connecting properly. And again, we had so many things, so many reasons for that to happen, to be fair. But it was I knew something was wrong. Everyone else knew something was wrong. But it's like, well, how do you do something about that? And for the individual perspective, it, you know, I said I knew I needed a break. So my version that we went on holiday, we actually had quite a long holiday that summer, and I thought that'd be great. Meanwhile, my daughter was in hospital twice in 2 trips we went on, and it was absolutely horrific. It turned into be what should have been a very nice thing into an even more stressful scenario. And it just went on. It really did. It went on. Then we hit back to September. Work was really busy, and it all caught up. It just got to a point where the last straw was really. I was on a business trips in New York. I was doing, I don't know, like 25, 26 meetings in 4 days, out pretty much every night, up very early in the morning. And I got ill somewhere along the line. And when I got ill, it took me weeks to recover. I just didn't feel good for weeks. And then actually I caught something called prostatitis, which is an infection of the prostate, which I've never had before. And obviously quite concerning when you've never had anything like that. So my mind then suddenly started to think the worst thoughts in the world. Dr. Google came out. I wouldn't recommend that for anyone. And as someone said to me, is that I was doom scrolling. And that was basically the final straw, and that was it. And my wife had contacted my brother separately, I think in the December. My brother had reached out a couple of times, and I reached out to him. It was Easter Sunday, Easter Monday, one of the two. And I said, look, can we go for a walk? And we went on a walk for like an hour and a half. And then, came back, and I knew something had to change.
And I think that's, one thinks, well, holiday's going to work. And actually, these things, they don't necessarily help. And you need more professional help to recognize what is going on with you. And just sort of taking one step back again is that and I think one of the things that you point out in the book is that when your resilience is low, the chances of addiction are far higher and far greater to fall into. And the other thing is, why is it that with work in particular, we praise people who work ridiculous hours when in fact we know it is so detrimental to health in many ways?
I think that's a huge problem. It was certainly a huge problem for me because I love what I do. And I think that's a first and foremost for people who probably overwork. But I would probably say it's the best thing to do in terms of a bad addiction. So working really, really hard and doing really, really well and being really, really successful is not going to have a detriment on your life. Invariably, it should help. In theory, you become financially more well off, therefore stress levels are lower in certain elements, and you can breathe. But then what it ends up becoming, overworking in particular, is another way to hide, another way to suppress your emotions, another way to not think about the thing you need to think about. And it, I remember at one point, it certainly became an escape for me, because I knew that by working, I wasn't doing anything, let's say, wrong. I knew that it was only going to help me, my company, my family. Um, but you lose the connection to people, unfortunately. You lose connection to family, friends, yourself. You know, you forget what it is that you enjoy outside of work, because yes, work leads to finances and success and achievement, but that doesn't define who you are. I was just saying, and just becoming more whole is part of the key to, you know, being a well-rounded and healthy individual.
And I suppose it is trying to recognise what that tipping point is, where it becomes from, dedication comes to the compulsion and the addiction side of it all. And as you said, it's really a great way to hide where you're not going to be told off, for want of a better word.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know, if you're sitting in your room doing cocaine or heroin or whatever it might be, it's quite an obvious one to say you shouldn't be doing that. It is exceptionally hard to tell anyone not to work, because
Mm.
most of us, can't say all of us, but most of us need to work to live and to earn and provide for themselves or their families.
So, having sort of realised, you know, um, that there is an addiction there, it isn't just you're working hard. If we're looking particularly at high functioning addiction, it's like then okay. We recognise there's a problem. People have been telling us, and if we're fortunate enough, we do. We picked it up and we realise we need to have help. So, what would you say that the first steps are to going about seeking help? Because I think if you haven't had any sort of issues like that before, and you think that I'm not a drug addict, I'm not an alcoholic, or whatever those things are. So, an addiction clinic's not for me. But clearly, addiction is the word that we're discussing here. Where do you start to look for support?
Well, I think there's a balance now more than anything else. So I was very fortunate. My brother runs rehab clinics and wellness clinics, so it makes my life a lot easier in that sense. I was very, very fortunate to have him as support. He'd been through addiction as well when he was younger. Well, to be fair, it never leaves you, so he's still going on his journey. And I think that's the other side of it. You know, we've been through this as a family from a young stage as well. The best thing that I could say now is that a lot of these, say, rehab centres are not just focusing on addiction. It is wellness and burnout. Burnout and wellness are hand in hand, really. And actually, I guess you could say in theory, well, why? You know, I spent time with a lot of people who were addicts, who'd been in rehab for some time. You think, well, how does that work? Why is there a connection? Well, it's all the same thing. It still comes down to mental health, and going through what I say is the program, and I assume that every centre has their own program. It's usually a 28-day program. I was very fortunate to spend time in Rainford Hall, which is an amazing place, beautiful setting, just out in the open, out in the country. And I think that's the kind of holiday you need. It's the reset for yourself. And the one thing, well, not the one, they do loads of different things, but they reset you by everyone's up at the same time. You know, I was up early there. I was up at 7, ready for breakfast before most people, one of the first down. And it got me into a better pattern, because I think I got so tired doing other things that actually I did need a break. But I needed a break from life, and I needed to understand when I came back in what type of person I wanted to be and why I didn't want to be the other person. Because when you're overworking, it's not just overwork. You're snappy, you're irritable. It's the same kind of I guess withdrawal symptoms as you would from some behaviours or drugs as well. You know, when you're not doing the thing or someone's interfering in the thing that you're doing, you get very defensive, very snappy, and very standoffish. And all of these things are linked together. So, look, for me, the first thing I would do, going back to your question, is look for wellness centres and firms that have, you know, a wellness centre. Obviously, I can highly talk about Steps Together in Rainford Hall in particular because of my own experience. And as I said, I said this actually to my brother and to quite a few people. I would go back tomorrow. I'd go for a long weekend with the greatest of pleasure. I love the food. The people were great. You speak openly, and look, there's a lot of vulnerability there. There's no doubt about it. And when I went, I needed to go. I needed to have that moment. And there are people in, dare I say, a lot tougher situations, and you can, well, it was nice for me to do it at times, but you can be there as a support for them, and they can be there as a support for you, and it becomes a community. And I think that's the thing with these scenarios. Being in a community is pretty much one of the most important things you can have around you. It's people that understand, people that are going through it, and people you can share with.
But I think that must be very hard, and it depends how far you are into I use the word addiction, because I know some people have gone so far down that they've lost the ability to understand how to necessarily communicate. How do they communicate on a day-to-day basis? How on earth do they express their own emotions when they don't even know what their emotions are? And I suppose it's having somebody basically hold your hand and guide you, give you a path and guide you back.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think it's a great way to put it. I'll go back to my first moment. I walked through the door in Rainford Hall. I had no idea what I'd signed up for. I just said yes. So I was nervous. I was anxious. I think I was everything. And I rang the doorbell and, kind of gingerly walked in. And then you're met with just people who knew, they knew what you needed. They knew to be compassionate and kind, and I would say loving. It's a different way of putting it. But, these people, a lot of those guys had actually been through addiction themselves. So there was a genuine human care there. And that's the first thing for me. You've suddenly gone into a very unusual situation, one that you've not seen before. And suddenly you're then being cared for by other people, which really, in life, most people want to be listened to. Most people want to be heard, and which are very, very different, by the way. And people want to be cared for. The human nature is, I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be loved. If your needs are met, I think, in those three things, I don't know what else there is that someone would genuinely need. Obviously, I've just made this up. It's just top of the head stuff. But I genuinely think about that, and that feels true to me. What else do you need in life? Yes, experience and exploring and everything that life can give you, which is fantastic. But the basic needs are the ones that need to be met. And I think those are the ones that invariably set people onto trauma, addiction, and maybe just going down a path they wouldn't necessarily want to do otherwise. The other side of addiction as well is that, if you don't see it, you don't know. But if you have seen it, you can't unsee it. And I think that's also another element. If it's been around you for a long time, people that friends, family, parents, siblings, then you can also lead on to, let's say, unkind paths.
And then I think it's, sort of thinking about your own journey and the things that you come up with some great one-liners. There's no, I can't remember what it was, but it was like, there's no time like the present, i.e. to get on with it and sorting things out. And there is never a right time for certain things. But, thinking, leading forward, it's clearly something with all of these things that once you've recognized it, you understand it, hopefully, and then you've put in your management of it, that it's something that you carry on working on through the rest of your life, like you do generally with life, how you try to work on yourself.
Absolutely. It's as I said, it's the awareness. I think once you become aware of why you've gone down, say, your chosen path, it just stays with you. It's just like a subconscious thing in the back of your mind going, am I doing the right thing? Have I gone too far? Do I need to change this? Should I change it? Why haven't I changed it? and then I think that's the steps. Because if you go, okay, well, I'm in a similar pattern, because unfortunately, human nature, we are habitual creatures. It's very easy to go back into a similar pattern. And it is changing that completely, which is the difficult step and stage. But there's no question it stays with you. But it is a lifelong journey. There's no guarantees that relapse won't happen. In fact, relapse is highly common. And again, if you were to relapse, it's important to be kind, be understanding to yourself, and obviously if you're around relapse as well, to be compassionate, because it's not that anyone who goes down the route of addiction, it's not because they want to. It's a disease. This is a disease. They can't stop themselves. And if you think about the point of addiction is that, bottom line is you're constantly doing something that is either harmful for yourself, for your life, or for the people around you, and you can't stop doing that. That just doesn't seem of same mind, and therefore it becomes a disease rather than someone acting out.
Absolutely. So, and just just to quickly go directly to the book, I just want to say that I just love the way it was structured. It is a big book to go through, but there's something in that for everybody, whether you have or you feel you have an addiction yourself, or a family member, or somebody you love, or just actually out of interest, because it's all about checks and balances in your own. And we're all going down a path of life, whether it's an addiction one or not. There is addiction, and I think you do say somewhere along, we all have some form of addiction somewhere along in our life path anyway. And it's just how some of us cope with it better than others, I suppose. So, on sort of a last sort of thought, what would you like readers to leave with? What would be the one main message that you'd like to get over to somebody who reads your book?
I think first and foremost, don't be scared of the size. It is a reference book. You can read anything from anywhere. It's not an A to Z book. Pick it up, pick out the bits you want that relate to you, and take what you want from it. I think that's first and foremost. Secondly, no one should be scared of the word addiction. It is, sadly, mental health and mental health disease is only going to get worse as we progress with the difficult financial economies we're in, the global wars we've got, COVID, we're still reeling from that, and the young minds that it really harmed. And just being aware of this, being aware to notice someone else going through a difficult point, noticing yourself going through a difficult point, being able to say the right words to someone, being able to spot something early enough that individual yourself can go and get the help that they need, whatever it might be, whether it's a hand on someone's shoulder, or directing them to a therapist, or directing them to a wellness clinic. It's just having that awareness, that understanding, that I think is the absolute key for this. And yes, it's the addiction blueprint, but this is awareness of life, and to help yourself or others not go into the trap of addiction or worse.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Oliver, for sharing what actually ended up really being talking about your own personal journey. But I think it makes it much easier for people to really understand that someone who has been there and understands the emotions behind it all is really critical, and is the success to your book. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you, and thank you for your kindness. As I've always said, if it can help one person, then it's done its job. If it can help more, then yeah, it's an honour.
Right, thank you, and thank you, everybody.